Thank you everyone for joining today. It's an honor to be here, and I'm really excited to share some of the key lessons we've learned starting a company from scratch and targeting Africa first. Now, so we started with the central premise that warmth is a basic need, like food or water. Now, what happened was that we learned that over 1 million infants die annually from preventable hypothermia and lack of accessible warmth. And this was really shocking because this was about 8 years ago. And what we realized was that, I had been doing research in polymer and phase change chemistry that could provide instant warmth. So we ended up digging in. We spoke directly to about 200 doctors, nurses, volunteers, and Ministry of Health officials. And what we learned was that the challenge was in the timing of where the babies or moms were. During transport, whether you're coming from a village to the hospital or from the labor and delivery ward to the neonatal intensive care unit, there was a lack of warmth. In fact, you needed to keep the babies around 103 degrees Fahrenheit, but there were no resources to do so. Battery packs, one-time use warmers, none of these were available. In addition, we found that there were not just no methods of warmth in transport, but a lack of incubators in a number of the hospitals we were evaluating on site. And finally, there was a lack of life-saving incubators, which, because they would take an incubator meant for one baby and then put 2 to 6 infants in an incubator, it led to overcrowding and increased risk of cross-infection. So what infant warming solution did we invent? So we imagined a world with safe, non-electric, reusable warmth. And what we did was we took the time through all these conversations to prototype and use our stakeholders on the ground in Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania, Zimbabwe, to work with us to refine an infant warming blanket incubator. And over the course of the past 4 years, we've achieved FDA clearance. And we've activated our clinical trials in not just pilot clinical trials, but beyond. This is the President's wife of Kenya, Margaret Kenyatta, seeing our blankets in use in person. Our INCUBE blankets are saving 8,000 lives right now. And we are warming those babies in 32 hospitals based in 12 countries. So I'm excited to share with you the lessons that we've learned, including what it took to get to about $150,000 in annual revenue, be able to raise $265,000 in pre-seed funding and $112,000 in grant funding. Going to Africa was the key to our success. Specifically, why Africa though? So when we first dove in, our first trip overseas was to India because 3.5 million preterm babies are born there, and preterm babies are most at risk for hypothermia. Kenya has an order of magnitude smaller number of preterm babies at 193,000 born annually. But what happened is, as we dug in, we found the following key things that really helped us refine our target market strategy. The first is that Kenya, like many other of the core countries in Africa, it's considered a gold standard medical device and surgical standard of care country. So in a number of these market sectors, if you're able to successfully break into Kenya with a solution, you can more rapidly expand into the Horn of Africa region, including Uganda, Ethiopia, Sudan, Somalia, Tanzania, and then break into the rest of the African continent. We also found that there's a robust $1.5 billion medical device and equipment market in Kenya alone. The larger African continent totals $7.1 billion in market size, growing at about a 5% compound annual growth rate to 2023. Fourth, when we began working with our partners, and they weren't just small medical device distributors, they also included the Ministry of Health, Doctors Without Borders, Rotary Club International. What we learned was that this is a largely underserved market, that there are not as many players serving 1.22 billion adults in Africa, or the 32 million preterm infants born across the African continent. And finally, most importantly, as a startup that was co-founded by a group of material science engineering students, we had limited funding and resources, limited time and bandwidth. So a successful pilot in Africa could total 10 to 50 units of infant warming blankets being deployed in the field, versus 1,000 to 10,000 that would be required for India. And that's what guided our strategic choice to target Africa. And what things have we seen changing? So as it turns out, there's robust and rapid, growth in the digital infrastructure. One anecdote, in 2016, we were visiting a remote hospital in Western Kenya that was only accessible through dirt roads winding through the mountains. And the roads were so steep that as we drove, we had to actually lean to make sure we didn't fall into the ditch next to the road. In the back of that Ministry of Health Humvee, I had perfect wireless internet access. And I was able to communicate by WhatsApp to my research associates in Michigan from the middle of Kenya. So Kenya is, at 41%, ranked third on the continent after South Africa and Seychelles in terms of financial services and access. Because of the digital infrastructure, tools, products, they can spread rapidly by word of mouth. And one good example is that M-Pesa, a digital payment platform, kind of like the PayPal for Kenya, grew rapidly. And within 3 years, grew from 7 million M-Pesa accounts to 31.6 million within just 3 years. We experienced similar growth of 250%, growing from 3 hospitals in 3 countries into 32 hospitals in 12 countries. In addition, the middle class is growing. So most of you probably already know this, but when people think of Africa, don't think of the African safari. There's robust infrastructure and business processes and people who are ready to receive high quality goods and services in the Middle East and Africa. That there is an appetite for it, especially with the 59.8% growth. Now, one of the most frightening parts of selling anywhere internationally is getting paid. So some of my mentees would ask me, what terms did we sell under? And we ended up, initially, because we had challenges collecting on payment, because it could take 30 to 120 days, we now sell with a 50% upfront and 50% upon delivery of the infant warming blankets. And this was critical because, as you can imagine, for the transfer of the funds can actually take quite some time. We use specifically wire transferring from our bank directly to the African bank used by our medical device distributors or the banks used by the Ministry of Health. We also were able to use PayPal, but it's not available in all parts of Africa. And finally, as a result, we use methods like Wave and QuickBooks invoicing. It's, when you think about sales and being able to work overseas, it's just like what Victor and WE were saying. It is it's different, but there's a commonality where people are hungry for high quality goods that can make their lives better. And working overseas in Africa, there are similar things, similar challenges from shipping, as Jade explained earlier, and language barriers. But we use the following methods to overcome those barriers. The first was finding local partners. We ended up working in the first year of deployment in Africa very closely with not Doctors Without Borders or the large institutional organizations, but with Relief for Africa. They are a medium-sized medical device distributor. And because of their insight, we were able to go directly into these top-tier teaching hospitals and have conversations with the CEOs and the chief medical officers and directors of procurement right from day one. Your goal when you're working overseas is to look and understand the local infrastructure. Who are the key players, as Victor said, and who can you work and partner with? Because rather than reinventing the wheel of 30 years of relationship building, who can you work with who understands the space, who can partner with you and help you with last mile delivery and execution of your solutions? Some other key, I would say, opportunities for you and areas to be aware of. Some Western companies are not always welcomed. In some parts of Africa, there is very much a perception that some companies are creating problems or a need where none existed. So what we ended up doing was being right out there in the field, touring, meeting with the doctors, nurses, midwives, anyone who was a key player in the process, the everyday use of using our infant warming blankets. As you consider doing business in Africa, figure out who are those key stakeholders. If I were to walk, 1,000 miles in the shoes of someone who needs this product most that I'm thinking of bringing to market, who are they? Where do they spend their time? Where do they get their news? The second thing we found that we needed to focus on was scalability planning. How are you planning to sustain market entry and the delivery of a long-term supply of product? One of the key things that Ministry of Health officials shared with us, because they ended up mentoring us as well as helping support our entry into Kenya, was that so often companies come in with a solution and they pass out samples, or they pass out a small supply, a pilot of pharmaceuticals. However, they do not establish the cost and the long-term logistics to be able to deliver that product to market long-term. And they don't dive in and dig into the channels for delivery, such as through local retailers or going into these medical device distributors. Third is unforeseen costs. This was something that almost took down Warmilu in the early years. Shipping is not a simple matter of shipping from point A by truck to point B. There's freight where you ship by air, customs clearance, brokers, understanding who's responsible for the goods at what point in time, and being able to pay for certain costs associated with export taxes and value-added tax, and finally, last mile delivery. We ended up partnering with global brokerages that do freight forwarding in order to be able to break into new countries quickly. It took our time to break into a new country from about 9 months down to a month. And we even signed a carrier agreement with UPS. Now, as a small to medium-sized company, you think that's outside of the realm of what you can do. However, what we learned was that as an innovator even, individual innovator, or a 5-person company like Warmilu, you are able to sign these kinds of agreements to be able to facilitate long-term sustained delivery of products, goods, and services. And also it helps you to quote out and understand the cost for delivery. And finally, finding high-quality partners. So when we went to Kenya, one of the first things we did was go to the Ministry of Health, and we met with the Deputy Secretary. But I'll never forget, there was a sign outside of the Ministry of Health that said, "This is a bribery and corruption-free zone." Yes, which you laugh, but it's very important because you want to work with partners who have that kind of high integrity, who don't take shortcuts, and who don't accept bribes, which can significantly increase the cost of delivering a much needed product service to your end customer. So you have the power to control who you work with. In addition, we worked with groups like the Department of Commercial Services to be able to screen our partners and get a better sense of their background by reaching into their networks to tell us if they've heard good or bad things about a given partner. Okay, now I see the time, so I wanted to be mindful. I'll take another 2 minutes, Jade and everyone. What steps did we take to protect ourselves legally? We did establish letters of intent before we even dove into deeper conversations. And just to be able to get ourselves on the same page, what a successful outcome would be. Whether it was just doing a pilot or closing on a $50,000 sale. We also closed and had our intellectual property protected before we went overseas. But that is just general good business practice, especially if you are an advanced high-tech company. So that is something critical, and we worked with our patent firm to be able to get that patent issued even before we went overseas. And finally, being able to have export controls, so being able to put our foot down and make sure that our customers really took the time to understand who we were as well as our stage. So what do I mean by that? We received an inquiry from the United Nations to warm babies across the globe. And we were just far too early stage. At that point, I would say it was about 2.5 years ago. We were only making about 300 to 500 infant warming blankets per year. So being able to have very good pilot partners who are going to be able to work with you was critical. And so these are our partners today, and I'm excited to be able to start the Q&A session. Thank you for learning about how we spread the warmth to save lives.